Hey, good morning and welcome to our broadcast today. I am so happy to have you with me. Let me begin by telling you a funny story. A young mother of triplet toddlers, get that one, triplet toddlers was having a bad day. Everything about the kids in the house was just driving her crazy. I mean, it was, as you can imagine, pure chaos. So one day after finally getting the three kids down for a nap, she went out in the front yard, lifted her arms up to the heaven and just yelled, "Ah!" Well, her neighbor heard the yell and came running over. "Are you okay? What's wrong, honey?" And the mom replied, "You know, with my three little ones running all over the place, it has been absolute chaos around here, and I mean every day. I can't seem to get anything done, and I have absolutely no time for myself." Some of you moms have probably been there, haven't you? Well, she responded, the neighbor responded, "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetie. Listen, have you ever thought about getting a playpen to separate the kids from you from time to time?" Well, the mother bought one the next day, and after about a week, she went over to her neighbor's and left a plate of cookies and a note for her neighbor on her neighbor's porch. And the note said this: "Thank you so much for the playpen idea. I bought one last week and it has been heavenly. I climb in there with a good book and a glass of wine and the kids don't bother me a bit." Great story, isn't it? I love the story, but not just because of the humor. I love it because it identifies a tension that we all face: chaos versus calm. And I imagine that you're familiar with that particular tension, aren't you? Today, our 23rd Psalm series comes to another beautiful verse, verse 5. I want to read it to you in context of the rest of the verses. Listen to this, and then we'll talk about it. "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows." Today, I want to talk with you about calm in the chaos, and specifically the calm in your chaos. Would that be all right? Because I know good and well, with these times that we're living in, you and I both understand about chaos, don't we? So let me show you some of what the Lord does, the Lord who is our shepherd does for us in times of confusion and chaos. Now, verse 5 that I just read here a moment ago speaks about a table. And not just a table, but as we shall see, this is a blessings table. So the first thing to remember when times get difficult for you and chaotic for you is this: God's table of blessings is always filled. Always. Look at the wording here. You, God, You prepare a table before me. Now that word prepare means to make ready beforehand. And the word table here means blessings spread out and plentiful. Of course, for the sheep, blessings spread out referred to as grazing pastures, usually high up in the mountains, able to be reached only after the winter snows had melted. And the shepherd would go beforehand up there to make preparation for his sheep. He would distribute salt and minerals at strategic sites, and he would investigate each piece of ground, checking for hazards, poisonous weeds, and other potential problems. But the point is, prior to the sheep needing to graze, the shepherd was preparing that table. Now watch this. The Lord who is our shepherd does the very same thing for us. He sets this lavish and opulent table for us, a table filled to overflowing with any and everything we could possibly ever need. And He does it before we were even aware that we had a need. So the question is, what do you need today? Finances? Answers to your difficult questions? Peace of mind in the midst of all this chaos? Guess what? God's table is full of bowls and bowls of blessings to meet those needs. By the way, David says God prepares His table in the presence of our enemies. Now, what does that mean? Like the father who said to his son, "Son, if you misbehave one more time, you cannot eat supper with the family tonight. You'll have to eat by yourself." Well, sure enough, the little boy messed up again. So at supper time, Mom and Dad put his food on a TV tray and sent him back to his room. As they began to eat, a few minutes later, the family heard coming from the little boy's room, "Father, I thank Thee that Thou hast prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Funny story, but don't think that's exactly what David had in mind when he wrote these particular words, do you? So here's the deal. I mentioned last week that the sheep had predators like lions and bears and venomous snakes. Well, the truth is we also have a predator, an enemy. He's called Satan or the devil in the Bible. And in the New Testament, he's likened to a roaring lion. You've heard that, right? However, our enemy is a bit different than the sheep's enemies in that our enemy cannot hurt us as God's children. And the reason why is because he was defanged and declawed, if you will, by Jesus at the cross. But though he cannot harm us, I'll tell you what the enemy can do. He can for sure make you think he can harm you. In fact, that's what his roar is all about. It's all about intimidation. It's all about ramping up your fear quotient until we cower and retreat and live lives that never make a difference for Christ in this world. And it is all about making us forget that table of blessings God has spread out for us. So, the next time the devil hurls his intimidation and fear at you, how about you just reach over and take a lid off that dish on God's blessing table? You know the one. That dish labeled, "Greater is He that's in you than he, the devil, is in the world." Or that dish that says, "No weapon formed against you shall prosper." Amen? And remember, God never leaves off a blessing when He prepares your table, not a single one. Did you ever sit down to a meal with a family like Thanksgiving or Christmas meal, and someone said, "Oops, forgot the green beans," and then they run to go get them? Hey, let not your heart be troubled. God never forgets a thing. So God's table of blessings is always full for you. And secondly, His oil of restoration is always available. David says here, "You anoint my head with oil." I just love the sound of that phrase, don't you? Sometimes the rigors and regimen of everyday life and living are just about more than we can bear. Would you agree? And I'm telling you, this last year, with COVID invading us and the rioting and the election chaos, it's created a perfect storm type of an environment for us. A perfect storm that has exacted a heavy and emotional toll on all of us. Would you agree with that? Like the little boy who went to the grocery store to buy some detergent. And the manager of the store asked him, "Well, son, why do you need detergent?" He said, "Because I want to give my dog a bath." And the man responded, "Well, detergent is pretty strong. It could be harmful for your dog. Maybe you should try some actual dog shampoo." And the little boy insisted and said, "Oh, no, I want detergent." And so the man went and got a box of detergent and brought it to the boy. And as he was paying, the manager said to him, he said, "Now, son, you remember this can be very dangerous for your dog." And the little boy assured him everything would be fine. Well, a couple of weeks later, the little boy was back in the store, and he saw the same manager. And the manager said, "Son, how did it go with your dog? When you gave him that washing, how did it go?" And the little boy said, "Well, not so good. My dog died." And the manager responded, "Oh, son, I'm so sorry, but I told you it could be dangerous." He said, "Oh, no, sir, it wasn't the detergent. I think it was the rinse cycle that got him." Get it? Here's a question. How many of you have felt like that 1 or 2 days this past year? Like you've been through the rinse cycle? of life. Does that make sense? So what's the answer? What's the solution? Real simple. God's table of blessings and God's oil of renewal. For instance, at the end of the day, the shepherd would always bring the sheep back to the pen or the sheepfold, and as the sheep entered, he would greet each one of them, watch this, by name. And he would also hug and hold each sheep if he was able to and just love on them. Incidentally, isn't that a beautiful picture? The shepherd calling his sheep by name? Because like Max Lucado says, when we see a flock of sheep, we see exactly that, right? A rabble of wool, a herd of hooves. We, at least I, don't see a sheep. I just look out in the field and see sheep. Sheep that all look alike and all sound alike. Does that make sense? But not so with the shepherd. To him, each sheep is different. And each sheep is special. And every face is unique. And every face has a story. And every face has a name. That same truth holds for us. Like when we see a crowd, that's just what we see as a crowd, isn't it? I was watching the Bucks beat the Packers last Sunday. Excuse me. Let me say that one more time for those of you who are in Wisconsin, and I know we have a few viewers there. I was watching the Bucks beat the Packers last Sunday, and though the crowd size was small in the stadium due to COVID restrictions, still, it was a crowd. But guess what? Somewhere out there in TV land was a mom or a dad looking for that one person, that one face, that one son or daughter who was in the stands for that game, right? Well, I didn't know anyone that was at Lambeau Field last week in that game, or in the stadium. So when the cameras panned the crowd, guess what I saw? I just saw people, persons, plural, a herd of humans, a flock of faces. That's just the way we humans do, right? But not so with our shepherd God, because to him every face is different, and every different face has a name. And get this, every name is known by God. Isn't that something? Have you ever been out somewhere and run into someone you knew, but you had not seen them for some time, and they greet you with one of those, "Hey, man," because they can't recall your name, right? I do it all the time nowadays. On the other hand, isn't it great when you meet a person and they greet you with like, "Hey, Michael," "Hey, John," "Hey, Nancy"? And the reason it is great is because it's God-like. God knows our name. Look at someone, or just say it out loud. Say, "God knows my name." But something else here. Sometimes in the course of its normal and everyday activity, a sheep might suffer an injury due to the rough and rugged terrain of its surroundings. So at night, there in the safety of the sheepfold, the shepherd would tend to the wounds. Now, why would he do that? Because that shepherd is trying to find places that might be injuries from that day's activity. The shepherd is probing the sheep when he comes into the sheepfold, checking for scars, for bruises, maybe for a cut, rubbing his fingers down, trying to find an abrasion or an injury. And if he discovers some irregularity in the wool of that sheep, some impairment, he will take his flask and pour or anoint that area with the soothing oil. And then he will massage that oil into the wound in order to medicate and soothe and heal that sheep's hurts. Now look what David says in this verse. He said, "You anoint my head with oil." That means simply that our shepherd does the same thing to us that David did with his sheep. Oh, listen, aren't you glad that Jesus, our shepherd, cares when we are hurt and wounded? Man, I sure am. And maybe that's you right now. Maybe you're feeling like a defenseless sheep today, running from pasture to pasture, bleeding nose, bruised legs, broken little ears. Maybe your heart's been wounded, maybe by a bitter divorce, or your soul has been crushed by some bitter accusation. Maybe you're that one being intensely tormented by regretful memories of past failure and sin playing in the theater of your mind. And you remember every word, don't you? And rehearse every scene, looking for release. Hey, if so, if that sounds like you, I have some good news for you. Relief is just one prayer away. Because if you will ask Him to, Jesus, your shepherd, will anoint you such that you can leave that prayer renewed and whole. By the way, I said that's good news. Actually, that's great news right there, yes? So God's table of blessings is always full. His oil of restoration is always available. And the last thing today, when God gives to you, it is always more than. Say that with me, more than. David says here, you anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Literally, my cup is overflowing, or my cup continues to flow. Now, this is another great picture. Here we have a dutiful and loving shepherd, and a dutiful and loving shepherd who would faithfully draw water from a pool or a stream each evening if he had his flocks overnighting in a distant pasture somewhere. However, if he was home, he would draw water from his own well. That was most always something quite deep in the ground. The shepherd would utilize a long rope with a 3 or 4 quart leather bucket, and he would let it down and draw it back up by hand. And that water then would be poured into large stone cups placed beside the well. And when that happened, the sheep would all come to drink. Now watch this. While a hired hand might hurriedly just splash a little water in each of the cups for a quick drink for the sheep, a true shepherd would never resort to that. When the actual shepherd of those sheep filled their cups, they were always filled up to the brim, literally running over. Which is why David uses this phrase, my cup runs over. And get this, not only was the shepherd providing a necessity for his sheep by filling their cups, he was also saying to them, hey, drink up, drink your fill. There's plenty for every one of you. Isn't that a great picture for us? Man, what a shepherd. Man, what a God we have. Amen? By the way, the next time you want to have your mind blown, just do a little Bible study of God's promises to supply your needs. You will not find one single instance where God promises to fill anything that He doesn't promise to make it overflow. Not one. Why is that? Because that's just God. That's just who He is. Like when Paul told the Ephesians, God is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine according to His power that is at work within us. In other words, He gives us not only what we ask for, but more than we can even dream about. Because with God, blessings always overflow. Like the prodigal son when he came to himself in the pig pen. You remember that he determined he was going home to his dad to make amends. And when he arrived, the father welcomed him with open arms. And if you're familiar with that story, you know that the father also killed a calf for the celebration, didn't he? But it was not just a calf. Do you remember? It was a fatted calf. Their cups overflowed. Or how about the story? Do you recall the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 men and their wives and children over on the hillside? And all they had was a little boy's 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And not only did Jesus miraculously provide for their needs, He also had 12 baskets of food left over after feeding those thousands of people. What happened there? Their cup overflowed. Or when Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding, scholars tell us He made probably upwards of 120 gallons of wine. How many of you know that's a lot of wine? And they didn't need 120 gallons of wine, but that was just Jesus. He always makes the cup overflow. Think about it. He gives peace, but not just peace. He gives peace that surpasses all human understanding. He brings joy, but not just joy. His joy is described as joy unspeakable and full of glory. So listen, how do you perceive God? How do you view God? Do you sometimes hesitate coming to Him with your requests, with your questions and doubts and fears? Maybe you're one of those that view God as some tight-fisted ogre who delights in seeing how much He can withhold rather than how much He will freely give. Maybe you're like the lady who went to cash a check, and she was standing there upon receiving her money. She stood there and counted, and then counted, and then counted again, until finally the bank teller asked, "What's wrong? Is it not all there?" And she replied, "Yes, it's there, but just barely." Hey, God is not the God of barely, is He? He is the God of more than. Say more than. He's the God of more than because He always overflows our cup. Now, with that in mind, let me close with this. I'm going to put up 4 basic areas for you where chaos seems to break out for us personally. I want you to quickly just rank each of these 4, and here's how that works. For instance, the first one here is emotional chaos. My emotional chaos level is about a 7. I'm struggling a bit today, you might say. My feelings are just all over the place. I'm feeling sad, or I'm angry, or I'm depressed, whatever. So what I'm saying, let's rank each of these today. And first of all, go ahead and put a number down for your emotional chaos. How chaotic are you emotionally right now? Then the second one here is financial chaos. Are you out of work? Are your bills piling up? Are you worried about retirement? Put a number for your financial chaos. How about physical chaos? Maybe you're ill today. Are you out of shape? Do you fear COVID? Put down a number for your physical chaos. And then this fourth one, relational chaos. Is it all bliss and sweetness in your relationships? Is it like you can't wait for Valentine's Day? Or are you skipping it this year? Put down a number. All right, now here's the deal. Here's what I promise you. I promise that if you will allow the Lord your shepherd to set the table of your life, He will never disappoint you. He will replace your chaos with His soothing oil, and He will meet every single need you present Him with, and He will do it through a virtual table full of blessings. And then, when that happens, you'll be like the little girl whose teacher asked her to quote Psalm 23, verse 1. And she stood before the class and confidently said, "The Lord is my shepherd, and that's all that I want." Hey, she had it, didn't she? And you can have it too. So that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you again next week as we wrap up this series. Until then, if you have questions, if you have a prayer request, something you'd like to talk over, I am very easy to get hold of on social media, on email. So just let me know. And let Jesus, your shepherd, take care of your chaos because He has plenty of calm to go around. Have a great week. Be blessed. I'll see you soon.